Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Mr Deputy President. Pursuant to Standing Order 164, and by coincidence, genuinely by coincidence with the previous motion, I seek an explanation from the Minister representing the Minister for Defence, Senator Wong, regarding the failure to respond to the order for production of documents, motion number 243, agreed 22nd of June 2023, in relation to the MRH-90 Taipan helicopter Jervis Bay incident.
Minister.
Thank you, Deputy President. I am happy to follow that up. We didn't have notice of the issue of the OPD that Senator Roberts was going to refer to, so the Minister isn't here and able to provide a direct response. Normally, a heads-up is provided so that we can prepare an answer. And I acknowledge you came over in question time and said that you would be doing this, but it didn't relate. You didn't inform us of what minister or in relation to what OPD you were after. So I would have to come back and come back to the chamber at a later time with an explanation.
Senator Roberts.
I move that the Senate take note of the minister's failure to provide an answer or explanation. Well, so much.
So I think you can take note of the explanation given by the minister.
Sorry,
yeah.
Deputy President, I was just asking if Senator Roberts could indicate the number of the OPD he referred to.
So, Senator Roberts, you just take note of the minister's response.
I move that the Senate take note of the minister's response. Well, so much for the Albanese Labor government's promises to be transparent and accountable. Yet again, they failed a transparency deadline, failing to produce the documents the Senate ordered them to produce 6 months ago. 6 months ago. In March this year, a Taipan helicopter was forced to ditch into the sea in Jervis Bay. No people died. 2 were injured. Thankfully, those injuries were minor due to the pilot's skills. Skills they shouldn't have had to rely on, yet had to because Defence made them fly a dodgy helicopter. Separately, in July, a Taipan helicopter crashed in the Whitsundays, killing 4 Defence personnel. 4. This order for the production of documents related to the non-fatal Jervis Bay incident in March. The government has failed to produce any details after the Defence brass promised they would produce such reports. What you didn't hear in the minister's explanation is the true story of why these documents haven't been produced. The hierarchy in Defence is covering up their mistakes. The Taipan helicopters should have been pulled from service a decade ago. There were technical shortcomings in the capability that could not be defended. There are dangerous, catastrophic safety issues that Defence knew about. Instead of dealing with those issues or grounding the helicopter as they should have, Defence and the politicians kept it in service and flying. Now 4 personnel who piloted and flew in that helicopter have died in a crash. We remember now Warrant Officer Class 2 Joseph Laycock, or as he was known, Phil. Troop Commander Captain Daniel Lyon, Lieutenant Maxwell Nugent, Corporal Alexander Nags. We hope their families, despite their enormous loss, will find peace. Next, and I do not say this lightly, the Defence hierarchy and politicians who allowed the Taipan helicopter to continue flying have blood on their hands. No one in Defence can claim to not know about this helicopter's problems. The MRH-90 Taipan helicopter was identified on the list of projects of concern in 2011. 12 years ago. The Taipan remained on that list until it was grounded for good after the Whitsunday crash. 13 years before its planned retirement. During its lifetime, the Taipan was grounded no less than 9 times due to ongoing problems. Yet Defence kept flying it, or rather, Defence kept soldiers flying it. Australian taxpayers spent at least $3.7 billion on the project. The Taipan cost $50,000 an hour to fly, and I can hear Senator Shoebury's laughing, and I understand why. Compare that to the Black Hawk at an estimated $15,000 an hour, 30% of the cost. The Australian National Audit Office identified some of the MRH-90 Taipan's many serious problems. These included engine failure. Without an engine, helicopters fly like a brick. Transmission, oil cooler, fan failures. Poor availability of spares. On the Navy aircraft, problems with the cargo hook. And on the Army helicopters, problems with door gun mounts and the fast roping and rappelling device. Some of the problems. Yet Defence kept flying the helicopter. The Navy couldn't hook cargo into its Taipans. The Army couldn't fire guns at the same time soldiers were in the helicopter. Our Australian Army considered the cabin and roll equipment are not fit for purpose, as the seat size and harness cannot accommodate personnel wearing combat gear. Yet Defence kept flying it. They knew the engine could fail and the helicopter would drop out of the sky, yet they kept on flying it. Defence analyst Marcus Hellier wrote in 2021, quote, "Back when I worked in the Department of Defence, we used to occupy ourselves from time to time calculating how much money the taxpayer would save in the long run if we just walked away from the MRH-90 utility helicopter and bought Black Hawk helicopters instead. The answer was a lot, and the sooner you did it, the more you'd save by avoiding sinking more acquisition dollars into the MRH-90 and realising the substantially lower operating costs of the Black Hawk. But even though those numbers were shared with Defence's senior decision-makers, the department couldn't bring itself to take that step." End of quote. Defence had all the information. They knew the Taipan was a waste of billions of dollars. They knew it could not do the job it was meant to do and supposed to do. They knew it had catastrophic safety risks. And they knew all of this for more than a decade. Yet Defence kept on flying it. That's why the government will not answer this order for the production of documents after almost 6 months. The cost, the fatalities are huge, particularly the fatalities, avoidable fatalities. But I also want to talk about another huge impact, the impact on armed forces morale, the Defence forces. What happens when you ask someone to keep operating faulty, life-threatening equipment? What happens to trust? You know the answer. Then we look at the Chief of the Defence Force, the hypocrisy, awarding himself a medal reserved for those in action when he was sitting 1,000 kilometres from the action. How does that build trust? It destroys trust. Some years ago, when I was working in the mining industry, I met two people who had come from the Defence Forces, from the Army specifically, officers. One was so high and so skilled that he had been asked on occasion to take 6 of his mates and go into the jungles of Vietnam, well beyond enemy lines, take on a job and come back. He rose to be in charge of jungle warfare training. And Barry, and along with John, who was a captain in the Army, had been a captain in the Army, told me the key to Army culture and the Defence Force culture. And that key is mateship. Barry had to lecture other countries' defence forces and security forces on counter-terrorism work. He said in most countries they did not understand what mateship was. It's intangible and yet it's so tangible. The impacts are so tangible. He also talked about standards. Everyone who joins the Army, for example, comes into the Army, is then made equal with everyone else so that they get the feel of looking after their mates. And then they're trained to a very high standard, and they can rely on each other and those standards. And I'll tell you a little story. Barry and John both said that when you're behind a log, an incoming machine gun fire, the only thing worse than jumping over that log and going into that machine gun fire is running away and leaving your mate behind. That's how strong it is in the Army. And there'll be lots of people from the Army who'll be watching this parliament and know exactly what I'm talking about. The third part of mateship is trust. Trust. How can we have trust when the Defence Forces are going woke? I hear from so many soldiers and airmen and sailors that they're sick and tired of the Defence Forces going woke, and it will jeopardise their lives in battle. That is not looking after our soldiers. And then we talk about national security. All of that impacts on national security. I'll say it again. The key strategic weapon we have in this country, in our armed forces, is the mateship, the training, the standards, and what used to be trust. The warriors are fine. The problem is the Chief of the Defence Force and the top brass, and as we've heard recently, the Minister who is supposed to hold them accountable. We've had some briefings, preliminary, and I want to commend a young public servant who said that the problems with the Taipans are not just in the military, but also in the politics and the politicians. These politicians and the top brass are responsible for deaths. They have blood on their hands. Even the slightest amount of scrutiny on this project will reveal the pervasive corruption in the defence hierarchy and will reveal politicians' mistakes, and will show that these people in defence and in politics have blood on their hands. One Nation will continue pushing to hold those in the defence hierarchy to account and protect our warriors serving in the Defence Force.
Minister.
Just wish to make a contribution to this debate. My understanding is that in regards to this order for production of documents, that the Senate was provided with advice on the 12th of May 2023 that the Deputy Prime Minister, the Honourable Richard Marles, had advised that Defence is conducting an internal investigation into this incident and he intends to respond to the order once this investigation is complete.